Chosen one, listen carefully. What is ending now was never meant to stay. This moment is not about something being taken from you, it is about something releasing you. You are not watching your life fall apart. You are watching it realign. What feels like loss is actually permission to move forward without dragging weight you were never called to carry into the next season. You have sensed it for a while. Something has felt off. Even when things looked fine on the outside, you smiled, showed up, did what was expected. But deep inside there was a quiet knowing this no longer fits who I am becoming. That knowing is not confusion. It is clarity finally rising to the surface. Endings often come when we have outgrown what once sustained us. A job that used to excite you now feels like survival mode. A relationship that once felt safe now requires you to shrink to keep the peace. A routine that once grounded you now drains you. These are not signs of failure, and these are signals of transition. Think about your work life for a moment. You may still be performing well, still reliable, still responsible, yet something inside you resists waking up each morning. You're not lazy. You're not ungrateful. You are misaligned. The grace that once flowed easily has slowed, not because you did something wrong, but because the assignment is ending. Grace lifts when growth demands movement. The same applies to finance. Perhaps money feels tighter now, even though you're doing everything right. Unexpected expenses, delays, a sense of pressure. This is not to break you, it is to loosen your grip. God often allows financial discomfort when He is preparing to shift the source. When provision becomes unstable, it forces you to stop trusting systems and start trusting direction. And then there are relationships. Some connections are fading quietly, less communication, less effort, less resonance. You replay memories and wonder what changed. What changed is you. You no longer feed on the same conversations, the same cycles, the same compromises. Some people were meant to walk with you through a chapter, not the whole book. Here is the truth many resist. Not everything that began with you is meant to continue with you, and not everything that ends is an enemy. Some endings are mercy in disguise. God is not cruel with His timing. If something is ending now, it means it has completed its purpose. You are not being punished, you are being repositioned. The discomfort you feel is the friction between who you were and who you are becoming. That friction is temporary, but the growth is permanent. There is also grief here, and it's important to name it. You are allowed to grieve what once mattered. You are allowed to acknowledge the memories, the effort, the prayers you poured into something that is now closing. Faith does not deny pain. Faith walks through it without turning back. What you must not do is confuse familiarity with destiny. Familiarity feels safe, but safety is not always obedience. Sometimes staying feels easier than leaving, even when staying costs you your peace. God does not call you to be comfortable, He calls you to be aligned. Let me ask you something directly. Are you holding on because God told you to stay, or because you are afraid of who you'll be without this attachment? This is where many people miss their moment. They pray for change but panic when change arrives. They ask for elevation but resist separation, yet separation is often the first evidence that elevation is near. Heaven is not silent right now. Heaven is firm. There are moments when God whispers, and there are moments when He closes doors so clearly that explanation becomes unnecessary. This is one of those moments. The door is closing not to trap you, but to stop you from going back. You may feel exposed right now, like the safety net is gone. But exposure is often the precondition for expansion. Seeds only grow after they leave the protection of the fruit. And you, chosen one, are in the ground, not buried, but planted. There is a promise that speaks directly into endings like this, not with sentiment, but with authority. The Spirit spoke through the prophet Jeremiah. Chapter 29, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Notice what this promise does not say. It does not say the plan avoids endings. It says the plan includes them and still leads to hope and a future. God's plan often moves through disruption to reach destiny. Hope here is not vague optimism. Hope is concrete. Hope looks like waking up one day with clarity instead of dread. Hope looks like provision arriving from an unexpected place. Hope looks like peace replacing anxiety, even before the full picture is visible. Imagine yourself months from now, standing in a new rhythm of life. You're not scrambling anymore. You're not forcing things. You're operating with clarity, and you realize the ending you resisted was the exact turn your life needed. This is the moment to agree with the separation instead of fighting it, to trust that God removes what no longer serves your calling so He can introduce what does. Before moving on, acknowledge this transition. If this message speaks to you, like the video, share it with someone who is afraid of an ending they can feel approaching. And subscribe so you stay connected to what God is revealing here. And at the end of this section, comment the number 111 as a quiet declaration that you are stepping into a new beginning through this ending. One final question for you to sit with: if this ending is clearing space for the future God promised you, what would it look like to stop resisting and start walking forward? Chosen one. There is a reason loss seems to keep finding you. Even when you did everything right, you followed the rules, you stayed loyal, you endured longer than most would have, and still things ended. People left, doors closed, stability slipped through your fingers. If you've ever wondered why your life seems marked by repeated endings, hear this clearly: you were not being punished. You were being refined. Some lives are built on accumulation. Yours has been shaped by subtraction. And subtraction hurts when you don't yet see what it's making room for. You have lost things others get to keep. Positions others grow old in. Relationships others build families around. And for a long time, you internalized those losses as personal failures. You asked yourself what you did wrong, what you could have fixed, why God allowed it. But the truth is more uncomfortable and more powerful. Some things could not stay because if they had, they would have delayed who you were becoming. Loss keeps finding you because stagnation cannot keep you. Think about your career path. You may notice a pattern just when things become predictable. Something disrupts it, a restructuring, a conflict with leadership, a sudden sense of dissatisfaction that makes staying unbearable. You weren't unstable, you were being moved. God often uses disruption to prevent you from settling into ceilings disguised as security. Or consider your finances. Money comes, then stretches thin. You rebuild, then something unexpected pulls you back to dependence. It feels unfair, but dependence has been one of your greatest teachers. It trained your discernment. It sharpened your obedience. It broke your illusion of control. You learned that provision is not about numbers, it's about alignment. Loss also followed you in relationships. You gave deeply, loved intensely, stayed faithful, yet connections dissolved. Some people misunderstood you, others benefited from you but couldn't grow with you. These losses were not random heartbreaks. They were divine protections. Had those relationships lasted, they would have required you to keep shrinking. There is a difference between losing something and being released from it. What you experienced was release even when it didn't feel gentle. God uses loss to burn away dependency on anything that can replace Him. That includes titles, approval, routines, and even dreams that were too small for your calling. You didn't just lose things, you lost attachments, and attachments, when left unchecked, become limitations. Here is the part few are told: chosen lives are pruned more often. Not because they are weak, but because they are fruitful. Pruning looks like loss to the untrained eye, but it is evidence of investment. God does not prune dead branches. He prunes living ones. There were moments you begged God to let something stay. You negotiated. You promised to adjust, to endure, to compromise just a little. But heaven remained firm, not because God is harsh, but because he saw the cost of letting you remain where you were. Staying would have delayed your maturity. Staying would have muted your voice. Staying would have taught you to tolerate what you were meant to transcend. Ask yourself this honestly: if everything you lost had remained, would you have ever been forced to grow? Loss has a way of stripping illusion. It reveals what you truly trust. It exposes where your identity was anchored, and once exposed, it gives you the chance to rebuild on something unshakable. There is also a hidden mercy in repeated endings. They keep your heart flexible. People who never lose become rigid. They cling, control, and fear change. You, on the other hand, learned how to release, even when it hurt. You learned how to survive endings, and that means you are capable of beginnings. Others fear. You may be tired now, tired of starting over, and tired of rebuilding, tired of explaining your story. But tired does not mean finished. Tired means you carried weight and survived it. Heaven never wastes loss. Every ending carved space inside you, space for wisdom, space for compassion, space for authority that can only come from lived experience. You speak differently now. You see differently now. You no longer romanticize comfort. You value truth over stability. There is a line in Scripture that reveals why this pattern exists in your life, not as condemnation, but as clarity. The Apostle Paul wrote in the second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4, verse 16, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day." Notice the contrast: outward loss, inward renewal. What looked like deterioration was actually transformation. You were changing where it mattered most. Your life has been an exchange. What you lost externally was building something internally. Strength that doesn't depend on applause. Faith that doesn't collapse under pressure. Discernment that recognizes when it's time to move on without needing permission. Now imagine this: you step into a future where loss no longer defines you, but qualifies you. Where your story becomes guidance for others standing at their own breaking points. Where the very endings that wounded you become the proof that God carried you through. This is not a cycle meant to continue forever. Refinement has season, pruning has limits. But the preparation had to be thorough, because what you are being prepared for is weighty. Here is the question you must face before moving forward. Are you willing to stop seeing your losses as evidence of failure and start seeing them as evidence of calling? Because once you answer that honestly, the story shifts. The pain doesn't disappear, but it gains meaning, and meaning turns endurance into strength. Chosen one. There is a mercy hidden inside endings that most people never recognize while they are living through them. You thought the discomfort was resistance. You assumed the delays were setbacks. But what if God was using discomfort and delay to keep you from agreeing to something that would have slowly hollowed you out? Not every closed door is rejection. Some are restraint. You were walking toward spaces that looked reasonable, stable, even good. But good is not always God. And God will disrupt good if it threatens the call on your life. This is the part that hurts the most because from your perspective, you were willing, you were trying, you were ready to make it work. But heaven saw the compromise before you felt it. Compromise rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives subtly. It sounds like, just for now. It whispers. Everyone does this. It convinces you that small misalignments don't matter. But small misalignments, over time, bend destinies. Think about your work environment again. There was a moment quiet but clear when you felt pressure to lower your standards. Maybe it was integrity, maybe it was honesty. Maybe it was how you treated people beneath you or above you. You notice the tension succeed here, but become someone you don't recognize, or resist and risk instability. The delay that followed was mercy. God slowed the progress so you wouldn't succeed in the wrong direction, or consider finances. You were presented with opportunities that promised quick relief but required moral flexibility. Cutting corners, aligning with the wrong people, saying yes to income that would eventually demand silence where truth was required. When those options collapsed, you felt frustrated, but that collapse was protection. God blocked what would have paid you but cost you peace. Even in relationships, mercy often looks like discomfort. You felt uneasy around certain dynamics, conversations that normalized bitterness, jokes that crossed lines, expectations that required you to dim your convictions to maintain harmony. You tried to explain the unease away, but the tension remained. That tension was your spirit resisting erosion. God is deeply patient, but He is not careless with His chosen. When you are close to drifting into agreement with something that would shape you wrongly, He intervenes not always with answers, but with friction. This is why some seasons felt harder than they needed to be. You weren't fighting the enemy, you were being restrained by God. Delay is one of heaven's strongest safeguards. When God delays you, He is often preventing you from arriving somewhere too early, too exposed, or too compromised. The delay buys you time to grow backbone, not just skill. Ask yourself this honestly: how many times were you angry about a delay, only to later realize it saved you from regret? You wanted clarity. God gave you character. You wanted speed. God gave you depth, because speed without depth creates collapse. There were moments you nearly settled, nearly said yes, nearly stayed, nearly accepted less. But something always interrupted the agreement. A restlessness, a disruption, a sudden dissatisfaction you couldn't explain. That was mercy raising its voice. Here is the part you must understand now. God is not just protecting where you go, He is protecting who you become when you get there. Destiny reached through compromise poisons the reward. So God blocks the shortcut even when you're tired of the long road. There is scripture that reveals this side of God not as restrictive, calm, but as faithful. According to what is revealed in the book of Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 9, in their hearts humans plan their course, Adam, but the Lord establishes their steps. You planned, God redirected. You intended, God intervened. Psalm, not to embarrass you, but to save you from agreements your future self would have begged you to escape. Mercy does not always feel gentle. Sometimes it feels like frustration. Sometimes it feels like unanswered prayer. But resistance from God is safer than permission from Him when your character is still being fortified. Imagine an alternate version of your life, one where every door opened instantly. The position, the money, the recognition, the relationship. Now imagine the quiet cost, the standards you would have lowered, the voice you would have silenced, the strength you would have never built. God loved you too much to allow that version of success. You are not behind. You were being protected. And now comes the hopeful part. If God was this intentional about stopping what would harm you, He will be even more intentional about releasing what will sustain you. Protection proves investment. Delay proves destiny. Soon, you will notice clarity returning. Decisions will feel cleaner. Peace will stop requiring justification. Opportunities will come that do not demand self-betrayal. Alignment will no longer feel like loss. It will feel like relief. Before we move forward, anchor this truth with a simple act. At the end of this section, comment. God blocked it. This is not negativity, it is recognition. It means you understand that what didn't work out was not failure, but mercy. Writing it is a way of acknowledging that God intervened to protect your future. Even when you didn't understand it at the time, let me leave you with one direct question to carry with you. If God had not interrupted your plans back then, would you still be standing with your integrity intact today? Chosen one. Remember the story of Elijah. God led him to a hidden place called the Brook of Kerith. There, ravens brought him bread, water flowed steadily. It was quiet, protected, and sufficient. Elijah survived there not by his own effort, but by obedience. And then, without warning, without explanation, the brook dried up. Not because Elijah disobeyed, not because God changed his mind, but because the season had ended. The same God who led Elijah to Kerith allowed Kerith to dry. That detail speaks directly into your life right now, because you, too, were given a brook, a place that sustained you when you needed safety more than expansion, a job that paid the bills when you were rebuilding, a routine that stabilized you after chaos, a relationship that sheltered you while you healed. At the time, it was grace, it was provision, it was enough, but now it's drying. You still show up, but the peace is gone. You still try, but the flow has stopped. What once refreshed you now exhausts you. You keep returning, hoping something will change, hoping the water will come back, but each time you arrive, the ground feels drier than before, and fear asks a dangerous question. What if this is all I have? Elijah faced that same moment, standing beside an empty stream, knowing the place that once kept him alive could no longer sustain him. And here is the truth most people miss. God did not dry the brook to starve Elijah. He dried it to move him. If Kerith had never dried, Elijah would have stayed hidden too long. He would have survived when it was time to step forward. He would have remained in maintenance when it was time for mission. The drying was not cruelty, it was instruction. The same applies to you. You are not losing provision. You are being redirected to a different source. God is teaching you not to build your faith around places, systems, or patterns that were only meant to serve you temporarily. In everyday life, this feels unsettling. Income becomes unpredictable. Motivation fades. You feel restless without knowing why. You pray for restoration, but instead you sense movement. That's because God is not interested in reviving what has completed its assignment. He is interested in positioning you for what comes next. Ask yourself honestly, how long have you been trying to drink from something God has already marked as finished? The danger is not the drying. The danger is staying after the drying. Many people camp beside empty streams, praying harder for water instead of listening for new instructions. They fast, wait, and plead for God to resurrect something He is asking them to leave. But obedience is not insisting on yesterday's provision. It is following today's voice. Elijah didn't argue with the dryness. He listened. And when God spoke again, the next instruction felt riskier than the first. God sent him to Zarephath, not to a river, but to a widow with almost nothing. From certainty to vulnerability, from predictable supply to daily trust. That shift mirrors your life right now. God is moving you from control to dependence, from familiarity to faith. He is loosening your grip on what you could manage so you can learn to follow what you must trust. This shows up in ordinary decisions. Choosing to step away before the next plan is clear. Choosing integrity when compromise would feel easier. Choosing growth even when comfort begs you to stay. These choices feel like walking away from water into uncertainty, but God never sends you where provision hasn't already been prepared. Let me ask you directly, if God kept supplying you through a dried-up source, would you ever learn to follow His voice again? Sometimes God removes comfort so you can recognize direction. The grief you feel, the quiet sadness, the confusion, the fear is not proof that you missed God. It is proof that you leaned on the brook more than the voice. And God is correcting that gently, not harshly. Scripture names this moment plainly. The Word of God declares in the first book of Kings at chapter 17, verse 7. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. No emotion, no explanation, just truth. The brook dried up, and immediately after, God spoke again. Direction followed dryness. Instruction followed discomfort. Provision followed obedience. Hope lives here, because the same God who allowed the stream to dry has already prepared the next source. You simply cannot see it from where you're standing, and that is intentional because faith requires movement, not certainty. One day you will look back on this moment and realize the drying saved you from stagnation. It forced you to listen again. It pulled you out of autopilot. It reawakened discernment. What felt like loss will reveal itself as guidance. This is also a moment of quiet choice. Sometimes when you discover a well in the wilderness, one that gives water exactly when your strength was failing, you don't rush past it. You linger, you draw again, and you leave a small mark, not to claim it, but to honor it. Other times you notice someone nearby tired, dry, searching. You don't preach, you don't push, you simply gesture toward the water and say, "Here." This helped me. That is how nourishment multiplies, by being shared. And when you realize this is not a passing stream but a place your soul recognizes, you choose to remain connected to it, not because you were told to, but because growth needs consistency, and life flourishes near its source. Chosen one, the brook is drying because you are ready to move, not backward, not sideways, forward. Final question for this section: if God is calling you away from the dried up place, what would change if you trusted that He has already prepared what comes next? Chosen one, not every open door is an answer from God. Some doors open to test your discernment, not your readiness. At this stage of your journey, the danger is no longer stagnation, it is misdirection. You have learned how to survive endings. Now you must learn how to recognize which beginning is truly aligned. Because when God begins to shift your life, opportunities multiply, invitations appear, options increase, and if you are not careful, you may mistake movement for meaning. This is why discernment becomes critical here. Let's speak practically. In everyday life, doors rarely look spiritual. They look like emails, offers, conversations, timing shifts. A new job offer with better pay but less peace. A business partnership that accelerates growth but pressures your values. A relationship that feels exciting but pulls you out of alignment. A relocation that promises comfort but silences your calling. The question is not, is this door open? The question is, who opened it and what will it require from me? Here are concrete indicators to help you recognize the door God is actually pointing to. First, God's doors carry clarity, not confusion. This does not mean you will have all the answers. It means you will have internal coherence. Even if the step feels big, something inside you settles instead of fragments. Anxiety may still exist, but chaos does not. If an opportunity immediately scrambles your values, fractures your priorities, or demands urgency without peace, pause. God does not rush alignment. Second, God's doors demand obedience before reward. Many people chase doors that promise immediate comfort. God often opens doors that require trust first. The door He sends you through may not impress others. It may look smaller, slower, less glamorous, but it will ask for your integrity before offering expansion. Pay attention to what is required up front. That requirement reveals the source. Third, God's doors align with your refinement, not your ego. Ask yourself honestly, does this opportunity feed my calling or my insecurity? Some doors appeal to wounds that were never healed, the need to be seen, the fear of missing out, the desire to prove something. God does not build futures on untreated wounds. If a door flatters your ego but weakens your character, it is not from Him. Now let's apply this to daily situations. In your work life, you may receive an offer that looks like advancement, more money, more influence, but it requires constant compromise, less family time, blurred ethics, or silence where truth matters. That door may be open, but it is not aligned. God's door may look less impressive on paper, yet it preserves your voice, your peace, and your future authority. In finances, discernment shows up as restraint. Not every financial opportunity is provision. Some are traps disguised as relief. God's provision does not rush you into agreements you cannot pray through. If money demands speed and secrecy, it is not God-led. In relationships, the right door does not require you to abandon yourself. It may challenge you, yes, but it will not erase you. God does not connect you to people who constantly pull you away from your convictions. The right connection may feel unfamiliar, but it will feel clean. Here is a simple daily practice. Notice what grows when you consider the door. When you imagine walking through it, does peace grow or shrink? Does clarity increase or does noise increase? Do you feel grounded or pressured? God often speaks through what multiplies peace. Patience. Alignment even when circumstances are uncertain. Another key indicator, timing. God's doors do not panic when you slow down to pray. If an opportunity threatens to disappear the moment you seek wisdom, it was never secure enough to build your future on. God is not offended by patience. He honors it. Ask yourself this direct question: if this door closed tomorrow, would I grieve the loss of God's will or the loss of my own expectations? That answer reveals more than you think. Scripture gives guidance for moments exactly like this, when multiple paths appear and discernment matters more than desire. According to what is revealed in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 6. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths. Notice it says paths, plural. Direction does not always come from eliminating options. It comes from recognizing which path carries God's fingerprint. And God's fingerprint is consistency. What He opens aligns with what He has already been forming in you. You have been refined for a reason. The pruning, the delays, the dried up streams, they trained your discernment. Do not ignore that training now. You are no longer choosing blindly. You are choosing wisely. Here is a hopeful truth: the right door will not require you to betray the lessons God already taught you. It will build on them. It will feel like continuation, not contradiction. Soon, you will notice this shift. You will stop chasing doors. You will start recognizing them. And recognition always brings peace even before certainty arrives. Before we move on, anchor this discernment with a simple act. At the end of this section, comment the number 444, not as superstition but as a marker. It represents clarity and direction. By writing it, You are acknowledging that you are no longer stepping through doors out of fear, pressure, or urgency, but through discernment and trust. Let me leave you with one final question to carry forward if God has already trained your discernment through past endings. What would change if you trusted it now? Chosen one. Stepping into the unfamiliar is where obedience becomes real. Up until now, much of your journey has been about understanding why things ended, what was protected, which doors matter. But this stage is different. This stage is about movement without guarantees. And that is where most people hesitate. Because the unfamiliar does not come with reassurance. It comes with silence. You are used to clarity after confirmation, used to peace after provision. But here, God is asking you to walk before everything makes sense, not recklessly, not blindly, but faithfully. This is the kind of obedience that cannot lean on evidence. It must lean on trust. The unfamiliar often looks ordinary. It doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or certainty. Sometimes it looks like taking the next right step without knowing the next three, applying when you don't feel ready. Leaving before the replacement is obvious. Saying yes to responsibility without knowing how you'll sustain it. This is where fear tries to disguise itself as wisdom. Fear says, wait until you're more prepared. Faith says, move with what you have. Fear says, what if this fails? Faith says, what if staying costs more? You are not reckless for moving forward. You are obedient. In daily life, this shows up quietly. You start a new role that stretches you beyond your comfort. You adjust your financial habits because the old structure no longer fits who you're becoming. You change how you show up in family dynamics, setting boundaries where you used to stay silent. None of this feels dramatic, but it is deeply courageous. The unfamiliar strips away your old identities. You can no longer rely on titles, routines, or roles to tell you who you are. And that can feel destabilizing. But what's actually happening is purification. God is teaching you to know yourself apart from outcomes. This is also where loneliness can surface. When you step into a new season, not everyone can follow. Some people only knew you in survival mode. Others only related to the version of you that stayed small. As you move forward, conversations shift. Familiar connections feel distant. That doesn't mean you are wrong. It means you are early. God often moves people ahead of their environment before He moves the environment to meet them. You may question yourself here. Wonder if you misunderstood God. Wonder if you moved too soon. That questioning is not doubt, it is adjustment. Even Israel questioned while walking through the wilderness. Questioning did not disqualify them. Stopping did. Here is what obedience in the unfamiliar actually looks like: consistency without applause, faithfulness without feedback, discipline without immediate reward. You show up because you were instructed to, not because it feels easy. And slowly, something changes. You begin to notice strength you didn't know you had. You respond differently to pressure. You are less reactive, more grounded. The things that once triggered panic now invite prayer. You realize you are no longer being carried, you are being trusted. This is the stage where God shifts from rescuing you to partnering with you. He does not remove every obstacle. He teaches you how to move through them. He does not answer every question. He teaches you how to listen. The unfamiliar becomes familiar not because circumstances change, but because you do. There is a subtle joy that emerges here. Not excitement, not certainty, none but steadiness. You stop chasing reassurance. You start trusting rhythm. You wake up with quiet resolve instead of dread. Scripture speaks directly to this kind of walking when the path is unclear. But obedience is required. as Jesus himself declared in the Gospel of Matthew, then chapter 14, verse 29. "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Notice what happened. The water didn't change before Peter stepped. The storm didn't stop. The condition remained unstable, but obedience created movement. The miracle was not the calm. The miracle was the walking. You are walking now. Not perfectly, not without fear, but forward. And here is the hope you need to hold on to. God does not require you to know the full path, only the next step. The strength you need for tomorrow will meet you tomorrow. Today only requires today's obedience. Soon, what feels unfamiliar will begin to feel purposeful. You will see patterns forming, provision aligning, people appearing at the right time. Not all at once, but enough to keep going. This is not the season of arrival. It is the season of alignment in motion, and motion matters. So when doubt whispers, remember this: you were never called to understand everything before you obeyed. You were called to trust the one who asked you to move. Final question to carry with you into the next section: if God is teaching you to walk without guarantees, what part of you is he strengthening in the process? You will later recognize this stretch as sacred ground, the place where certainty was absent but courage was formed, where obedience rewired your instincts, where you learned that faith is not loud confidence, but quiet consistency, choosing to keep walking even when nothing around you confirms you are right. And when clarity finally arrives, it will not feel explosive. It will feel familiar, like something you have already practiced. Because the unfamiliar did its work. It trained your spirit to move without panic, to trust without proof, and to stand without needing constant reassurance. Chosen one. There is a moment after everything has fallen apart when you realize something sacred. You are no longer fighting to survive. You are standing to be assigned. The collapse did not erase you, it clarified you. What broke did not disqualify you, it prepared you. This is the season where God does not rebuild the old structure. He crowns the new identity. You are not returning to who you were before the loss, before the silence, before the obedience that nobody applauded. That version of you could not carry what is coming next. You needed to be stripped of dependence on approval, certainty, and control. Only then could weight be trusted to you. Crowning is not elevation first, it is responsibility first. You feel it in daily life now. You respond differently to pressure. Situations that once triggered fear now invite discernment. You no longer rush to explain yourself. You are comfortable letting truth speak slowly. This is not detachment, it is authority settling into place. At work, you notice you are less impressed by titles and more attentive to substance. You don't need to dominate conversations to be heard. Your presence carries weight because it is anchored, not anxious. You can walk away from environments that once intimidated you because you no longer confuse access with assignment. Financially, you have changed too. You no longer chase relief at the expense of peace. You think in terms of stewardship, not survival. You understand that provision follows obedience, not panic. You have learned patience without passivity and that wisdom cannot be taught quickly. In relationships, the shift is unmistakable. You no longer overextend to keep people close. You no longer betray your boundaries for belonging. You choose resonance over attachment, depth over familiarity, peace over performance. This is what it looks like when someone has been crowned internally. But hear this carefully: crowns are not ornaments. They are assignments. What God is entrusting to you next will require visibility, consistency, and courage. You will be seen more clearly and misunderstood more boldly. That is why the collapse was necessary. You had to be freed from the need to be liked before you could be trusted to lead. This is where many people misunderstand glory. Glory is not applause. Glory is endurance with integrity. It is the ability to stand in responsibility without losing humility, to carry influence without becoming consumed by it. Scripture names this process not as tragedy, but as divine design. The apostle reminds us in his letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, verse 9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Notice what this means. Weakness was not erased, it was redeemed. The very places you thought disqualified you became the channels through which God's power flows most clearly. You are crowned not despite your breaking, but through it. You are not stepping into what's next because you are flawless. You are stepping in because you are formed. There is a quiet confidence in you now. Not loud, not aggressive, but immovable. You no longer need to announce your growth. People will sense it. Resistance will recognize it. Darkness responds differently to those who have already faced it and survived. The collapse did not delay your destiny, it accelerated it. You learned in years what others avoid for decades. You were trained in hidden places so you could stand in visible ones without losing yourself. Now comes a moment of choice, but not the kind that feels forced. Sometimes when you reach the summit after a long ascent, you carve a small symbol into the stone, not to boast, not to claim the mountain, but to remember I was here. I endured. This mattered. That quiet mark is not noise, it is recognition. And when you look back and see others still climbing through fog and fatigue, you don't shout commands. You don't drag them upward. You simply turn, point gently, and say, "There is solid ground here." That is how paths become shared through witness, not persuasion. And when you realize this is not a passing moment, but a place where truth keeps shaping you, you choose to remain near it, not because you were told to, but because growth needs continuity, and crowns are sustained by staying connected to light. This is how connection becomes covenant without pressure, without manipulation. When something feeds your spirit, you stay. When truth sharpens you, you honor it. When light steadies you, you choose proximity. Chosen one, you are crowned now, not with ease, but with clarity, not with comfort, but with authority. The collapse has completed its work. The refinement has done its job. What comes next will not ask you to become someone new. It will ask you to fully inhabit who you already are. Final question to seal this journey: if you have been refined, reassigned, and crowned for this moment, what would change if you stopped questioning your readiness and stepped forward as the one God prepared? What once felt like hesitation will soon feel like readiness. Not because fear vanished, but because it lost authority. You will recognize this moment by its calm. No rush, no proving. Just a steady knowing that the ground beneath your feet can now support your weight. And when you finally move, it will not feel dramatic. It will feel inevitable. Like a step you rehearsed in silence long before anyone was watching. This is how callings mature, not with noise, but with quiet certainty that you were shaped for exactly this moment. You don't need to rush away from this moment. Let the words settle where they need to settle. Not everything you heard was meant to be remembered, only what resonated. Some parts may have passed through you quietly. Others may have lingered, tapping gently at places you didn't know were still tender. That's enough. This ending is not meant to close a door. It's meant to leave one slightly open. Because some messages are not instructions. They are mirrors. They don't tell you what to do next. They remind you of what you already know but haven't yet trusted. If something here stirred you, you don't need to explain it to anyone. You don't need to label it. Simply carry it with you. Let it walk beside you into your next ordinary day. And if this journey spoke to you in a way that felt grounding, like finding a quiet place to rest your thoughts, then it's natural to pass that sense of steadiness along, not as an announcement, not as persuasion, but as one human gently saying to another, "This helped me pause." Sometimes sharing is simply an act of kindness, like offering shade to someone walking under the same sun. If, on the other hand, not everything resonated, that's okay too. No message is meant to hold every word for every person. You're free to keep only what felt true. Leave the rest behind without guilt. Wisdom doesn't require agreement, it requires discernment. You don't owe this moment anything. Your attention was enough. Whether you carry these words forward quietly, share them with someone who needs stillness, or simply return to your life with a little more clarity, each choice is valid. Meaning grows best when it's chosen, not demanded. So take what touched you, release what didn't, and trust that whatever stirred inside you knows where to go next.